Welcome to Wake Tech's debate on socialism and capitalism. My name is James Roberson. I'm the Senior Dean of Instructional Support and Chief Campus Officer at the Western Wake campus for Wake Technical Community College. You know, putting together an event like this takes a lot of hard work. The organizers, Kelly Markson and Forbes Dixon, would like to say a special thank you to Lynn Kapsak and her outstanding team at the Career and Employment Resource Division, to Professor Marshall McCoy and Kevin Flattery, and to the Wake Tech administration for their support. A special thank you goes to Charles Koch Foundation for providing the grant to fund this event. And finally, we would like to thank our police division for providing security this afternoon. I would also like to thank everyone for attending, including those who are watching through live stream. For those that are in attendance, please take a moment to silence your phone and other devices. We would like to dedicate this event to the memory of our friend and beloved colleague, Senior Professor Geeta Shaw, who recently passed away. Geeta Shaw oversaw Wake Tech's Economics Club, whose motto is, "Advance your mind." In that spirit, advance your mind, I am excited to host this debate. This afternoon, we are debating the merits of two very different economic systems, socialism and capitalism. Today's debaters are distinguished speakers, authors, and professors. Dr. Richard Salsman will be speaking for the merits of capitalism. Dr. Salsman is a professor of political economy in the philosophy, politics, and economics program at Duke University. He specializes in monetary economics, public finance, and the morality of capitalism. In addition to dozens of articles, he is the author of 3 books, the founder and president of InterMarket Forecasting, Incorporated, a senior fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research, and a contributing editor at the Objective Standard. Dr. John Komlos will be speaking about the merits of socialism. Dr. Komlos is a retired professor of economics from the University of Munich, Germany, where he taught for 18 years. In addition, he has taught in Austria, Switzerland, as well as UNC, Duke, and Harvard universities. He was born in Hungary and is a Holocaust survivor, and he has lived through fascist and communist dictatorship. He has founded the journal Economics and Human Biology, and he is the author of the textbook, The Foundations of Real-World Economics, now in its 2nd edition. Today's event will be structured in a debate style. Each speaker will be provided opening statements for 15 minutes. This will be followed by 5 minutes rebuttal, and we will have a shorter 3-minute rebuttal with closing statements. After that, the speakers will answer questions from both our audience and online as well, and as well as our seated audience. I hope you will enjoy today's debate, that you will find it thought-provoking, and that you will advance your minds. We ask that you remain quiet for the duration of the debate until the Q&A, and hold your applause until the very end. Please be respectful of our debaters, even when you disagree with them. They have very limited time to make their point about complex issues. Earlier, we flipped a coin toss to determine the order, and it was decided that John Komlos will go first. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, John Komlos.
Thank you very much. What a great crowd. Nice to be here. Dean Roberson, Professor Markson, Professor Salsman, thank you so much for organizing this debate. It is a great pleasure for me to be here. I think it is important, especially in these turbulent times, to explore ideas with mutual respect in search of the common good. Our quandary is not new. It is as old as Western civilization. We have been debating what a good society is, at least since Socrates and Aristotle began more than 2,000 years ago. So let us continue the tradition. I concede at the outset that, realistically speaking, socialism is not a feasible system, at least not for increasing the quality of life. Socialism, in fact, is a pejorative word, almost like an insult in the English language. So I take the liberty of erasing the last three letters from the word, the ISM part, so that it becomes social, and that, I think, will make it more acceptable.
More easy for me to win the debate.
So in fact, I'm here to advocate the social aspects of the economy. Everything that happens in the economy has a social aspect to it. I shall argue that we should consider not only the individual, but also the society in which that individual is embedded. I'm not producing this debate part by myself. I am in a public place so that the society is making all these things available to us. We have to consider the quality of life rather than GNP. And considering GNP is not enough. We need to consider also how that income is divided within the society. I call my perspective humanistic economics. It implies that society is more than the sum of its parts. It implies that you should care about your neighbors. And this is not such a radical idea. After all, love thy neighbor is one of the commandments in the Old Testament. This idea is also part of many other major religions. In fact, the golden rule is what I'm advocating: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The Germans call it social market economy. I experienced it firsthand for 18 years, and I confess that I did like it. You have universal health care. And by the way, no deductibles. You don't have to worry about paying for medical costs. Good schools, good apprenticeship programs that bring full-time jobs with benefits. Free college education so that you do not enter adult life burdened with $50,000 worth of debt. All these means fewer worries and a higher quality of life. Less worries, less anxiety, less stress, less antidepressants. The same can be said of many other countries: Austria, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Denmark. You know that. They could tame markets. If I found that everything was going well in this country, I assure you I would not be here. If there were not an opioid epidemic and a suicide epidemic, I would not be here. If alcoholism was not on the rise, I would not be here. If there were not 150,000 1,000 of these deaths of despair, I would not be. If this economy could deliver a good life to not only half of its citizens, but all of its citizens, I would not be here. If people had decent jobs, they would not kill themselves. If they felt that society cared and respected them, they would not go around shooting at their countrymen at random. So if only you open your eyes, you'll realize that the U.S. economy as currently constituted cannot provide a decent life to about half of its citizens. In fact, there is no quality of life indicator measurement in which the U.S. places high in international comparisons. Not in school achievement. We're 31st in maths. Not in longevity. We live 2 years less than our counterparts in the developed world. Our life satisfaction is the 16th in the world. We have 2 million people in jail who wouldn't be there if they had decent jobs. We have 5 million people on probation, more than anywhere else in the developed world. They would not be there either if they had opportunities. We are swimming in debt, or maybe I should say drowning in debt, D-E-B-T, both private and public. And so many of us are living paycheck to paycheck with no wealth, no savings, a modern kind of bondage. Our debt to GNP ratio has now reached 100%, and we have just added $1 trillion to the national debt. You know what $1 trillion is, don't you? It has 12 zeros after it. It's a million millions. So think about a million. Hard to do for someone like me, but then take it 1,000,000 times. It's mind-boggling. So I ask my opponent politely to concede that capitalism is also not a feasible system if you want a high quality of life. In fact, my belief is that the quality of life looks somewhat like this, with socialism at one end and capitalism at the other end, which neither of those systems deliver a very high quality of life. And we have moved away from this 0 point. We have moved away towards the optimum, but we're far from that, and I'm advocating that we should move further on that mountain towards the mountaintop, like Martin Luther said. Capitalism is not stable. Capitalism is not efficient. If you think about all the young lives that are wasted by the poor school systems. And it did not actually exist for very long in its original form. It kept on changing. It had to be tamed. Soon after it came into being, we realized that capitalism was not such a good thing to have 8-year-old children work in factories. So we stopped that. Then we came to realize that perhaps it was also not such a good thing to have people bought and sold as objects, and we ended slavery as well. Then came 1929, and capitalist excesses forced 1/4 of the population into the breadlines. So we ended some other excesses of capitalism. We created the Securities and Exchange Commission, for example. We created Social Security, the minimum wage, unemployment benefits, and so forth, but we did not go far enough. It is time for us now to go further. We have just been through the mother of all crises in 2008. And Ben Bernanke, chair of the Federal Reserve at that time, pumped $3.6 trillion to rescue the financial system. Again, that's trillions. How much time do I have? 4 minutes, okay. So I think it's just common sense to acknowledge that free markets have a lot of problems. It is markets, after all, are man-made institutions. They're not made in heaven. And by that I mean that they have faults like other man-made institutions. It does have some good properties, and we should use those, but without adequate social oversight, it is destructive. It is like taking a sledgehammer to our lives, as happened in 2008. How many lives were wrecked in 2008? How many members of your family and friends lost jobs, were evicted from their homes, lost their pensions and savings? Markets took a sledgehammer to our lives. Yet none of the CEOs of the major corporations, none of the banks that created all these problems left the 1%, not a single one of them. They're still part of the 1%. We were the ones who bore the brunt of the burden. Dick Fuld, who bankrupted Lehman Brothers, still got $450 million. Angelo Mozillo, who bankrupted Countrywide Financial, still got $400 million. Okay? Angelo Mozillo dreamed up one scam after another. That is socialism for the rich. Socialism for the rich, because they were helped out by the society. People on Main Street were left to fend for themselves. Capitalism for the poor. Okay? President Ronald Reagan gave $400,000 tax windfall for the millionaires. You heard me right. $400,000. I got 2 more minutes. And of course, they invested it well. They bribed politicians. They bought economists. In their insatiable greed, the 1% used their power to change the laws so that they would be able to get more wealth and accumulate even more power. So I ask you to join me in supporting a social market economy. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, just a quick reminder. Please, it's important that we be respectful to our debaters, and so please hold your comments and hold your applause, okay? All right, our next debater is Mr. Salsman.
Thank you, Professor Markson, and Mayor, thank you very much for organizing and promoting this event. I did not expect my opponent to bail out so soon. Talk about bailouts. He does not think socialism is feasible. He's right. But he also said he thought I would say that about capitalism. He's wrong. Capitalism is not only feasible, It's morally superior to any other social system. Couple of things. First of all, I'm going to defend capitalism. I'm not sure I heard a defense of socialism. I'm not even sure I heard a definition of it from my opponent. So let me give you one for capitalism. It's a social system based on the recognition of individual rights, including property rights, where all property is privately owned and controlled. What is government's role in such an economy? To protect individual rights. Government's sole function, that we aren't anarchists. Capitalism is not anarchism. Government's sole function is to protect those rights. And what are they? The rights to life, liberty, property, the pursuit of happiness. Not the guarantee that someone will give you property or happiness, but that you'll be free to pursue these things. And then if you earn them, you own them. There's 3 P's in capitalism you should know about that make the system work. Property, well, I already mentioned property. Prices, a price system, a price mechanism system that gives information and signals to people in markets. And then profit, the thing socialists hate most, profit, the net production of wealth, the net creation of value, not a theft from labor, not a theft from consumers, the net creation of wealth, profit. Let me offer for all social systems, not just capitalism, a framework. There's 3 ways to judge social systems, I think. Are they moral? Are they practical? Are they sustainable? Moral, practical, sustainable. So you could use this template to examine any system. Before I do that, you know that capitalism has many enemies. Socialists hate it. Fascists hate it. Some religionists hate it. Some conservatives don't like it because it's anti-family. Anarchists don't like it. So there's a whole bunch of things arrayed against capitalism. I get that. Capitalism, the case for it is a minority view. I understand that. But here's the framework. You know, a social system isn't per se moral. A social system just is what it is. But we can say something about, does a social system promote the kind of moral behavior that's fitting for human beings? What are human beings? Aristotle said they're distinguished as the rational animal. So we're not animals. We have the faculty of reason. If we use it, we have to choose to use it. But that's a distinguishing characteristic, isn't it? Rationality. So one of the moral things a human being does is use their reason. Use their rationality. That's a moral choice. That's a virtue. It's virtuous to be rational. It's also virtuous to be selfish. It's virtuous to pursue your own values, seek your own gain, not in hurting others, in exchange with others. And of course, they have a self-interest as well in dealing with you. Or they may or may not. You go your separate ways under capitalism. It's a system of liberty and freedom. Government doesn't invade rights, it's supposed to protect them. So you can see here, I'm defining morality as rational egoism. This is a rare view. Usually it's seen as the moral thing to do is go by your heart, not by your head. To serve others and sacrifice yourself if necessary, like Mother Teresa, not to be concerned with your own affairs primarily. Capitalism is a uniquely moral system because of this. It's consonant with human nature. It's consistent with human nature. That's why it's humane. That's why it has so advanced human well-being over the years and over the centuries. And by the way, centuries, you know, socialism is very old. Capitalism is very new. Capitalism is only about 250 years old. Socialism goes back to ancient times. It's in Plato. It was in Egypt. It's in the Incas. It's in Mesopotamia. The first colonies in America were communist. Jamestown, Plymouth. They starved to death at Plymouth and Jamestown until they privatized property. That's why we had Thanksgiving, because we overthrew the communal system and adopted a private property system. And of course, there was utopian socialism in the 30s and 1830s. in France, way before Karl Marx came up with its more radical militant socialism. Capitalism is new. It's a product of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, surprise, surprise, a product of a new respect for reason in the world after the medieval ages. When human beings came to prize reason, science, technology, they adopted capitalism as well. So is it feasible? It's totally feasible. Are there pure forms of it? Yes. My opponent advocated, notice, a mixed system, what he calls the social market economy, a blatant contradiction in terms. We don't need a mixture. If you know that one part of the mix is nutritious and the other part is poisonous, you would not mix the two. Capitalism is the nutritious system, the one that advances human well-being. And socialism, I'll say more in the rebuttal, not now, is poisonous, deadly, historically deadly, morally deadly. What about the practicality? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Everyone knows capitalism is the most practical social system. I think you even admitted that. I mean, socialists today don't go around saying capitalism doesn't produce the goods. It doesn't say that socialism is going to outproduce capitalism. It doesn't say that socialism creates prosperity. Marx claimed that 150 years ago, but it was refuted by history. There's no such thing as socialism delivering prosperity. So now they've moved on to another thing. We realize it creates poverty, but there are other issues. There are other things we value now. By the way, before I go on to the more practicality, every problem, every evil that my opponent just referenced is not due to capitalism, but to contraventions of capitalism. I mean, he mentioned the Federal Reserve. That's a central bank. That's central planning and money and banking. That's not capitalism. He mentioned public schools. I think public means government-run schools. Yes, they're a problem because they're government-run schools. They're not fully private schools. Pensions, Social Security, pensions. We don't have any pensions. The Social Security is bust. Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. I think you would agree with that if you know the act. Yes, because it's not a private system. The private systems are fine. The socialized pension system is not. Capitalism is a system of practical abundance and wealth. We can talk about that more later. I'm not going to belabor the point. It's so obvious. The last one is sustainability. Capitalism is uniquely sustainable. Young as it is, it has withstood the harangues and the interventions and the injections of socialist elements now for 250 years. And it has still survived in some form. But I would say only to the extent we have capitalism. If we keep looking for more injections of socialism, it's going to get worse and worse. Not because of capitalism. By the way, here's another way of looking at it. Capitalism survives despite repeated injections of socialism. Socialism, if you know its history, only survives, if at all, by repeated injections of, or periodic injections of capitalism. That's what Lenin did with the new economic program. That's what Gorbachev tried to do. It isn't sustainable on its own. It needs some measure of freedom. It needs some measure of production. It needs capitalism. So in terms of sustainability, it's also sustainable. If you get a social system that's moral, practical, sustainable, 3 cheers for capitalism. I don't know what else you would ask for. You would want the system to be moral, of course, to fit humanity, to be truly humane. But even if it was just that, if it weren't practical, I don't know whether people would really embrace it. I would embrace it if it was just moral. If it was just moral and we weren't that rich, I would say, go with that system. You got to do the right thing. But it's also practical. Now, if it were just moral and practical and said, yeah, but it's not going to last very long. It's a supernova. It's all wonderful, but then it's ephemeral. It's not ephemeral. It's survivable. It's feasible if we don't have continued injections of its opposite, of socialism. Here's another way of looking at the two systems, maybe. I don't want to beat up on socialism too much. I want to defend capitalism. I think that's the better way to go. Let the socialists make the best case they can, if they can. I don't think they can. But we still have to take this seriously, because the polls show that people want socialism. Mostly young people, and maybe they don't know the history of socialism. I don't know. Maybe they know it and they don't care. I'll say more about the history of socialism in the rebuttal. But capitalism, in a way, to borrow a phrase, is the ideal habitat for humanity. There's no other habitat so propitious for human well-being, for human flourishing. That's the kind of system you want if you care about human beings. If you're what I am, a humanist. What's a humanist? Someone whose primary concern is the welfare of humans. I'm a human, maybe I'm biased. You'll say, he's biased. Of course, he's a human defending humans. Yeah, and tigers defend tigers. And turtles defend turtles, I assume. Oak trees, oak trees. To me, it's more unnatural to be self-loathing. To me, it's more weird for a human to be a misanthrope. For a human not to like other humans, or not to like the human race per se. And there are some, especially in the environmental community, who say that. They say humans are a cancer on the planet. I'd sum up this way, because I only have a couple more minutes. The lineup would be something like this. Capitalism rests on respect for reason and rationality. Well, that's the key human attribute. Then in morals, it's based on egoism. It's based on self-interest. It's also based on individualism, the primacy of the individual. We take the individual seriously. Then there are rights, rights to be respected. Then government, constitutional. On every score, socialism fails. It's not for reason and rationality. If you look at Marx, it's for dialectical materials. Bourgeois logic, there's multi-logics. They're not for reason, they're not for science. They're against that. Egoism? No. They tell you to sacrifice yourself for the group. They don't tell you to pursue your self-interest. They consider that evil. Marx considered it evil. Individualism? No. Socialism is for collectivism, not individualism. The individual is not important, the collective is, and the individual should sacrifice himself to it. The opposite of egoism is altruism, if you know. Altruism means otherism. It means your primary focus and concern should be on serving others. And then rights. Socialists generally reject the idea of rights, per se. There are duties. They say, not rights, you're duty-bound to serve the collective. You don't have a right, you don't have any claim or individualist right. Well, let me just finish on this note, just to suggest, to help my opponent define his system. I mean, they do define it, Marx and others, as public ownership of the means of production. That's what they say. You've heard that before, right? Public ownership of the means of production. And if it's any sized economy, it's got to be state ownership of the means of production. These are not small little communes. They're also unsustainable. It's got to be statism. It's got to be a heavy-handed state. Well, I'll just leave you with this thought. Capitalism says private ownership of the means of production. What are the means of production? Land, labor, capital. When the socialists tell you it should be publicly owned, what does it mean to have publicly owned labor? The state, the public, the collective shall own labor? That sounds like slavery. That is slavery. And yet, my opponent says capitalism is consistent with slavery. Now, the very definition of socialism is you own people. The collective owns people. And when it's effectualized, governments tell people what to do, where to go, where to work, who to associate with. So in sum, capitalism is the ideal habitat for humanity. If you care about humanity, you should be foursquare for capitalism. It isn't just one cheer for capitalism, or two. It's three cheers for capitalism on every level. Moral, practical, sustainable. Thanks.
And now we will have the 5-minute rebuttals, starting with Dr. Komlos.
Only because Ben Bernanke pumped $4 trillion into the financial sector. Market was not sustainable by itself. What my opponent is saying is very theoretical, but where are the examples? Where are the 1%? The $1.2 million who somebody paid to get his child into Yale University. Okay, that's private enterprise. And Felicity Huffman was just sent to jail for 2 whole weeks for paying someone to take the SAT exam for her daughter. Not a bad bargain for getting her daughter into the University of Southern California. These are the examples how capitalism works when you have so much concentration of wealth. Concentration of wealth translates into concentration of power. And I think there are social market economies that are working just fine without these discrepancies. Where are the happiest people in the world? They're not in the United States. You know how much anxiety? Sorry. You know how much anxiety there is in the United States. The happiest people are living in Denmark and Norway. So we can take some examples from that. 50 people got through bribery into the Ivy League. 50 students were uncovered recently. Yale, UCLA, Northwestern, Stanford, Georgetown. That is what happens when power is concentrated. What? Your parents got all these tax breaks and they didn't get you into the Ivy Leagues? Sounds a little bit facetious, but what I'm trying to say with that is that Reagan's tax breaks were very detrimental for the society. That's when inequality really began. The middle class got a few $1,000s and they thought that was going to be good for them. But the millionaires got 400,000. And you know what? The middle class people still couldn't get into Duke University because they raised the tuition. And that was limited mainly to people who have lots of money. So that's where the discrepancy comes in. That's why capitalism is not a moral system. Sure, markets are good for many things. I'm not denying that. They're good for delivering food to supermarkets, but they are not good at making sure that the food is safe to eat. Okay? So for that, we need the USDA. The Food and Drug Administration makes sure that the ingredients are listed on the packaging. The market didn't do that for us. Okay? So markets are not good at delivering information. Markets are good at delivering cars to dealerships, but not putting seatbelts in cars until the society stepped in and mandated it. Okay, so I'm arguing that markets, yes, but you've got to have social oversight at every single step. I would like to ask my opponent to give us a few examples which markets actually work for human beings in a moral way. Boeing, for example, is a recent example. What happens when the Federal Aviation Commission lets its guard down? The people wanted to make more profits, and they skimped on safety, killed 365 people. My opponent is talking about morality of capitalism while California is burning. It's burning because we didn't take enough action for the environment. It's burning because the Pacific Power and Gas Company is a private enterprise, and they didn't want to invest money into new transmission mechanisms. They didn't invest in putting those power lines underground. What's the morality with that? Thanks very much.
Dr. Salsman, 5-minute rebuttal.
He's very theoretical. Where are his examples? I welcome the opportunity to name examples on both systems. The freest, most capitalist period in country is the 50 years after the Civil War. The slavery has been vanquished. By the way, the capitalist North defeated the feudalistic agrarian South regarding slavery. Thank you, capitalism. But that period before massive intervention by government starting around World War I was the freest and, by the way, the most prosperous period in human history. So the United States, if you want an example, the United States in the half century after the Civil War. But today, you can look up, the numbers are irrefutable. Just look up the index of economic freedom. Economists measure these things. You can look at these things. It's not a matter of opinion. The top of the list, the last time I looked, is Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand, Ireland, I think, is in there. The United States is ranked 12th. So it's not the top of the list, yes, because it's going more and more with injections of socialism. And by the way, these Nordic countries are not socialist. Many of them are ranked freer than the United States. They don't have public ownership of the means of production. They have a heavy welfare state like the US. But these are not role models, as Bernie Sanders and others says, for socialism. In fact, if Bernie Sanders was right, the US economy should become freer because it's not quite as free as Denmark and Sweden. Look it up, Economic Index of Freedom. Other examples, well, those are current examples. Even in cases where the mixture changes, it's obvious what happened. We have natural experiments. South Korea versus North Korea. Old enough to remember West Germany versus East Germany. You know what happened in these cases? One of them was socialist and one of them was more capitalist. Which ones were freer and more prosperous? The capitalist ones. In a case like China, when it goes communist in 1949 and impoverishes millions, and Mao kills 50 million people, yes, finally in 1978 they started liberalizing. They started saying, let's stop this madness and start liberalizing. And are they completely capitalist? No, but they're a mixture. But notice, when the mixture becomes more capitalist and less socialist, you get more humane, prosperous results. You can go the other way and say Britain was doing fine until it started nationalizing everything after World War II. Yes, it spent 30 years nationalizing electricity, coal, trains, everything, until it ground to a halt just before Margaret Thatcher was elected. And what did the socialists say about Thatcher and Reagan? How dare they move the needle back a little bit toward what's called neoliberalism? Yes, but to the extent they did, America and UK began to prosper again. But they don't like that. They don't like that. I understand why. In the 20th century alone, 100 million people were killed by socialist regimes. Why do students not know this? The Soviet Union, Cuba, North Korea, Red China, Pol Pot in Cambodia. Even today in Venezuela, you know that 20 years ago, Venezuela was one of the richest countries in the world. And they voted in Chavez. He didn't come in by coup. People voted for it. So you want democratic socialism, you want to vote for this stuff. They voted for Chavez. And the place is poverty-ridden now. And people are eating their pets because there's no food in the grocery shelves. What did he say? Capitalism is really good at filling the grocery shelves with food. Well, socialism isn't. Socialism empties the shelves. Good luck with that.
And now we will have a 3-minute rebuttal with closing statements, starting with Dr. Komlos.
Well, my view is that markets are not good at certain things, okay? They're not good when there are intangible things to consider, when there is safety to consider, when future generations are to consider, and therefore, I think that we need a social oversight on markets, at every single market. Otherwise, markets will collapse. I already mentioned California, but the private companies shutting off electricity to millions of users because they can no longer deliver it safely. They didn't have sufficient oversight.
In other words, they weren't thinking of the future. And that's where there are missing markets. And capitalism and selfishness is very problematic because we have to consider future generations as well. Bringing up Venezuela and other such regimes are not really convincing for me, because I'm not arguing for socialism at all. I'm arguing for social oversight of markets. I'm arguing for a social market economy. That's what we should get used to, social market economy as it prevails in Western Europe. Every Western European country has a political party that has a social word in its name. In Bavaria, the conservatives is the Social Christian Union. Okay, so we got to think about the society, and focusing on the individual is not going to get us into a good society. This capitalism has not delivered for us. Reagan has not delivered for us. It delivered for the 1%, and half of the population is living in a very anxious environment, and the economic environment. They're afraid of losing their jobs. They're afraid of losing their pensions, and that's why we have so many social problems. So this is not an economy that delivers. Capitalism will never deliver. We need social oversight. Thank you very much.
Dr. Salsman, 3-minute rebuttal.
Well, as I said before, capitalism has many enemies, from fascism to religion in some cases. Nazi Germany is a good example. If any of you know, Nazi is a contraction of what? A kind of socialism. What kind? National socialism. There's democratic socialism. There's utopian socialism. There's democratic socialism. There's all sorts of socialisms. The point is, they're all deadly to the extent practiced. So there's no case for a mix when you know that one part of the mix is poisonous. Yes, you can have these mixed economies survive in some sense, but they're not fully thriving in the sense that they would in a truly humane economy, which is a capitalist economy. But since I only have a couple minutes to finish, I don't want to spend a lot of time on rebutting. We can do some of that in the Q&A. I want to say something about the psychology of capitalism, and specifically the kind of psychology that makes people comfortable with capitalism or uncomfortable with capitalism. This isn't just economics. Well, as you can tell, I said brought in morality as well. But there's also some psychology here in the following sense. Some people will feel uncomfortable in capitalism, because the capitalism is the system of freedom. If you're left free, you really have to figure out what to do with your life. The capitalist argument is be as rational as you can, be as egoistic as you can, figure it out, find other people you can trade with and value with, and prosper and flourish and love your life. But it's work. And some people are afraid of freedom. They're afraid to be free. And that could be, I don't want to psychologize here. There's philosophic reasons why people are uncomfortable with capitalism. There's psychological reasons, but there is a certain psychological precondition to freedom. Is you don't have the tools and skills necessary to get along, but that's what you're learning. That's what you can acquire. That's what capitalism is. Socialism is the system of infants. It's infantile. It's juvenile. The citizenry has not grown up yet. They're comfortable being told, we will pay your way, we will rob the rich and give to the poor and all that. It's not the kind of thing a free, confident, self-esteemed person would want. They want liberty. They want to be free. Let's move on with my life. I don't want to stay in my parents' basement forever. Socialism is the institutionalized version of staying in your parents' basement forever. Only it's not that benign. These leaders do not love you like your parents. They will use you and abuse you, as the history of socialism shows.
Thank you, gentlemen. At this time, we will entertain questions from our audience, and we may have some questions via online. So, for those that wish to ask a question, there's a microphone right here in the center. Please come down and make sure you speak into the coil. Is there anyone here this afternoon that would like to ask a question? Okay. All right.
Are we starting where are we starting from?
Can we go ahead and start, sir?
Okay. Sorry. What's your name, sir?
Komlos.
Huh?
Dr. Komlos.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Komlos, I was just wondering, what is your opinion on the tendency of socialism to decrease the individual liberties of its citizens?
Good question. Good question. My point is that some freedoms will lead to the unfreedom of others, will have externalities. Okay, so we have to use common sense in order to limit action, let's say, in such a way that it leads to the common good. It is not good if you have a utility company in California that can decide for itself how much to invest in infrastructure, because that will then become destructive for millions in the state, you see. So there's no formula. There's no one formula that I can relay to you. It's an important question. But the issue is, can we go up closer to the top of that mountain that I showed earlier in my presentation? Can we get closer? Okay? That would be my answer to you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Next person.
Mr. Komlos, you cite California as your preferred socialist market system currently.
No, it's not my preferred. I'm citing it as an example of how capitalism can go
as an
in a bad
example.
direction.
How do you interpret the large homeless population, or the fact that the EPA in California has regulated most of the things in a socialist manner? Because, as my understanding of it is, socialism will provide government oversight in all areas, correct? So how do you deal
Well, the
with that?
homelessness is a different issue. The homelessness is a bad problem.
I would contend otherwise. You opened with going on about the quality of life, yet being homeless in a tent where human fecal matter is actually digitally mapped on the streets with an app, it seems that the quality of life there does not support what you claim.
Exactly. That's what I'm arguing, actually, that we need to have a system in which the income is distributed sufficiently, adequately, so that there are no homeless. I didn't see any homeless in Munich, Germany. People are not homeless in Western Europe because they receive a basic income. So I would suggest that we need to have a system in which basic income is guaranteed, where people are not homeless. That would be my argument.
My inquiry, though, isn't based on Germany. It's based on the United States state of California.
Well, it's not only in California, it's all over the place. I'm saying that income is not distributed adequately. Okay, that was my argument. I'm saying that Tim Cook of Apple should not be making $50 million a year, because that is taking the money away from poor people so that they can afford housing.
So your solution to it would be then to confiscate as standard, or?
Not confiscate, but to limit incomes in such a way that people at the bottom also can live a human life.
And
Because we're very often feel that, dogs get mistreated, we get all upset. And yet we mistreat people. People have a right to live just like dogs.
All right. We really have quite a few students that would like to ask questions. Next person.
All right. My name is Adam. My question's for you as well, Doctor. You claim capitalism is destructive, almost as destructive as bringing religion into a debate. How much destruction would a socialist society create for America's economy, considering the wealthy are the most mobile people on the planet? What would stop them from leaving America's tax regime for another better suited one?
Well, that's a mouthful.
Would you like me to repeat?
Would you repeat it slower? Yeah.
Sure. I won't repeat the first part, but so how much destruction would a socialist society create for America's economy?
Well, I'm not advocating, first of all, I'm not advocating a socialist society. I'm not advocating a destructive society. My economics is humanistic.
Considering
Okay.
the wealthy are the most mobile people on this planet, what would stop them from leaving this tax regime for another better suited one?
I'm afraid we have to talk about that afterwards.
All right,
I
okay.
could-
We do have an online question for both debaters, and this is an online question. And the question is, can you speak about our country's high cost of health care and how capitalism and socialism would address it? This is for both.
Well, this is another example of if you mix these systems, you're going to get a bad result to the extent socialism is injected into it. To what extent was socialism injected into the U.S. healthcare system? In 1965, Medicare and Medicaid were passed. Economists at the time predicted what would happen. The government's going to start financing healthcare. Healthcare inflation is going to occur. Then healthcare inflation is going to occur. Then they're going to impose price controls. They started doing that with HMOs in the 80s. Now there are shortages. Now there are problems. What is the solution according to the socialists? We didn't socialize enough. They wouldn't attribute all the problems we have today in healthcare. By the way, it's one of the greatest healthcare systems in the world because it's largely been capitalistic, but it's becoming less capitalistic. And as a result, it's generating all these problems. But the problems are due to socialist injections, poisonous injections I've been talking about. And it's very interesting that their solution is Medicare for all. Do you realize Medicare for some today is bankrupt? The Medicare for some is the elderly. So this is the typical socialist approach. If it's insolvent for a fraction of the population, impose it on the entire population. This is what socialists do. And then we'll all be standing in lines and dying waiting for health care. As in Venezuela, by the way.
The medical system in the United States is the most inefficient in the Western world. It's inefficient in providing preventive medicine, for example. It's more expensive. It's twice as expensive than the systems in Western Europe. The systems in Western Europe work well. That's why people live 2 years longer. So the system here is, doesn't provide enough health, and it's twice as expensive. I can tell you we can do a lot better than that, providing universal health care.
All right, Dr. Salsman, we have one more online question, and it is directed to you. What is the market-based solution to poverty?
As much capitalism as possible would be one. The other one would be to phase out and eliminate employment licensing laws. It used to be that something like 20% of entry-level jobs, you could just get the job if you were qualified. But the government licenses and therefore restricts your capacity to get a leg up in the world and start a job. That's something like third now, 40% of jobs in America. You have to go get a license. You need the government's permission to work. That doesn't help in terms of poverty. Here's another thing that causes poverty, the minimum wage. The minimum wage literally says if you are worth less than $15 an hour, the employer can't hire you. The employer will go to jail. The employer will get fined if they hire you. That's not helping people stay out of poverty. And then finally, if you still have poverty at the end of all that, some fraction of the population, it's called voluntary private charity. It's called persuasion. It's called asking for help. It's not mandating it. It's not robbing people to provide the help. It's called voluntary private charity, VPC.
All right, we'll take another question from the audience.
I'm here to tell you that I was born and educated high school in the Netherlands. Was born, educated in the Netherlands. I'm a student here now. I'm a 76-year-old adult. So I can tell you what happened in the past and how I look at things. Capitalism was fine when I ran a business. not when I wanted health insurance. At one point, when I was, I think, 62, my premium was going to be $1,800 a month for one person. I showed it to my doctor and I said, I'm not doing that. We made a deal. But that's besides the point. I think that if we could have both systems, instead of fighting, I'm the only one, you're the only one, work together and come up with something. What is wrong with your ideas and working together? Because sometimes you're better and sometimes you're better. But I could tell you, as someone at my age, I am very grateful for Medicare, because I did without health insurance for almost 5 years. And I love Social Security, because that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. We'll take another question from the audience.
This is for you, sir. I have a question. So you keep referencing Venezuela, right? Why is it you, whenever we talk about socialism, specifically from capitalists like you, we always seem to talk about body counts, right? So why is it that capitalism doesn't get body counts for all the wars in the Middle East, in the middle, or in South America, and why is American imperialism never referenced with its body counts all over the world and how it has to enforce itself as a military power to kill millions overseas?
There's no evidence of that. But
there's no evidence of the American military of killing millions of people overseas. Are you out of your mind?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you, we're going to be respectful
Can I please answer the
to our
question?
guests, okay?
Can I please have an opportunity to answer the question? Are you done? Are you done? Can I speak? Thank you very much. As a general rule, it's important to come up with examples. Venezuela is an obvious socialist system that used to not be a socialist system. The Soviet Union was called the USSR because it was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It is perfectly factual, perfectly scientific to look at the history, and you call it body counts, very dismissive about your body counts. Who cares about these body counts? They've been fully documented in books like Death by Government. Look it up, it's by Rummel. In books like The Black Book of Communism by Harvard University Press. Look it up. I'm not making this stuff up. This is what Mao, Stalin, Lenin, Castro, Chavez did. Now you're going to have your cases of, wow, there's a capitalist body count. We can go on and on about this. That's just nonsense. It's nonsense. And when you say something like American imperialism, I don't know what you're talking about. There hasn't been an American imperialist movement since the Spanish-American War of 1898. And that was Teddy Roosevelt, and he was a progressive and an interventionist. He was no capitalist. He was a hater of capitalism. He was Mr. Trustbuster. The last epic of American imperialism was a non-capitalist, anti-capitalist regime, Roosevelt. So just to be clear, capitalism isn't colonialism. Capitalism isn't imperialism. Capitalism isn't cronyism, corporatism, all the other things people come up with. It's a system where government is restricted to protecting individual rights, and that's it. And national defense, by the way, is one of them, but it's national defense, not national offense. It's reprehensible that the United States is trying to play policeman of the world. Yes, that's not a capitalist foreign policy. It's a policy of the Democrats who say we need to make the world safe for democracy. They're the ones sending the US military all over the place. That is not a capitalist policy.
All right, we have another online question for
may
both.
I just add one thought
Yes,
to
sir.
that, and that is that the truth of the matter is that both systems have extremes and can do damage to the human race. Stalinism was very bad. Venezuela is bad, I admit it, but there are social market economies that are doing very well. Let's keep that in mind. So
All right.
there you are.
So we have another online question, and the question goes to both debaters. How do you explain the continued consolidation of wealth in our country? We will start with Dr. Komlos.
Well, I already mentioned that it really started historically with Ronald Reagan's lowering the tax rate on across the board. The problem was that millionaires got $400,000 and people at the lower end got a couple $100 or maybe $1,000. And that created an incredible discrepancy. because the millionaires obviously invested, and as I said, they invested not only in financial assets, they invested also in government and created an ideology that fostered their own interests.
All right, Dr. Salsman, and I would like to remind everyone we have 3 minutes. So we have 3 minutes left. All right, Dr. Salsman.
The key for equality under capitalism is equality before the law. Everybody treated the same way by the law. But socialism requires equality of result. It basically says, regardless of what people do, regardless of what they invent, regardless of what businesses they start, regardless of how many customers they have, they didn't earn it. You didn't build that. That's what Obama and Liz Warren say. They simply do not believe in the principle of moral desert. They don't think anybody earns anything. But the point is, under capitalism, if it's free, the free element makes it obvious. If there's voluntary exchange, the reason wealth concentrates, if you want to call it that, the reason some people get wealthier is they are providing more service and value in the economy. They may be smarter, they may be inventive. Wealth is not created by physical labor. It's not the labor theory of value, which is the Marxist view. They cannot comprehend why people of brains and intelligence make the most wealth, because that's the source of wealth. The source of wealth is primarily intelligence and brains, not muscles.
All right, unfortunately, we're out of time, but we would like to thank our debaters. Let's give them a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Markson and her staff and her team, would you please stand? Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you all so much for coming out and participating in this wonderful debate. Have a wonderful day.